Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Why, hello there.
So we're going to be talking about the Rahu Ketu axis, and for some reason, I don't know why, but it just fascinates me. I just find it so interesting because there's so many other analogies that could come into play. Now, Rahu and Ketu, what do they mean to you?
Well, for me in astrology, they're nodes of the moon, and they're very, very important influences on our life. And they can be malefic or they can be beneficial. It's kind of up to you and how you want to set your sail.
And I would guess also it depends on where they are in the chart.
Yes, and they're also you can know more about your past life and current life depending on where they are.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing. So there's always legends behind everything. And basically, they are thought to be kind of a demonic energy when you get down to it. As you see the head being separated from the body, it looks to be human here, but we see a lot of depictions of these demonic energies in Vedic artwork that look very human, but sometimes they might have little tusks coming out or little horns popping out of their head. In reality here, they're actually the nodes of the moon. And as you see the Earth's orbit there, the positioning and how the moon revolves around the Earth. And interestingly enough, unlike most natural satellites, it doesn't spin as it does that. It always has one face locked to us. Interesting to say the least. And it's also a little bit abnormally large in comparison. But it most definitely has an effect on the Earth and everything that's composed of water because of the gravitational effects.
And us, yeah.
So, according to the legends, there was a battle over, well, kind of like the elixir of immortality by the demonic forces and the angelic forces. And in the Vedic world, that's the demons or demonic energies are asuras, and the devas are the angelic beings. And so the devas, you might have heard before, names like Vishnu and Shiva and Brahma and Lakshmi, Parvati, Sarasvati, Ganesha, Hanuman, Radhe, Sita, Rama, Krishna. It goes on and on. Many different beings in this eternal battle of light and dark, which we see in so many different systems. The duality of everything always represented there. And there's a lot of different ways we could look at it. But in this battle, well, it was a battle over the elixir of immortality. And, there's this serpent that ends up swallowing the sun and the moon. And then its head gets chopped off by Vishnu, who's the preserver of the universe, the preserver of manifestation, we could say. And Vishnu, as we have talked about before, some of his incarnations include Rama and Krishna. And many have picked up before that Krishna and that christened energy. So when we look at Rahu and Ketu in a chart, and this is how the Vedic chart is laid out, you see number 1, that's going to be where your ascendant is. And then everything goes counterclockwise. You see the second house, the third, the fourth, the fifth, sixth, seventh, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. 12 houses. There you go again with that 12 number.
There it is.
12 apostles, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 everything.
12, 12, 12.
12. 12 times 12 is what?
What?
144.
Of course.
Well, it's really interesting because we'll touch on another video, which I was going to include in this one, but then I think it's going to be a little bit too big and too expansive, so we'll do a separate video. There's 72,000 nadis in the body. 72,000 nadis. Nadis are energy channels in the body. So what's 72,000 times 2? It's 144,000. Wait a minute. The Bible says there's going to be 144,000. Some people interpret it as saints or saved people or angels. Is that just a coincidence?
It's all coincidences. Everything we talk about on this channel is purely coincidental.
Yes. Well, is it a coincidence that you see here Rahu and Ketu opposing each other?
No, they're always opposing each other.
See, they're just like the head and the tail are always on opposite sides of the body, right? So same thing with Rahu and Ketu. So, if you have Rahu in your first house, Ketu is going to be in your seventh. If you have Rahu over in 4, well, guess where it's going to be?
Yep, it'll be over there in your 10th.
Exactly. And, it goes on and on, like 3 and 8. See, this is just, well, again, it goes back to the nodes of the moon and how they are in opposition, one to the other. So, as far as the characteristics, and this was interesting, this article about the Rahu Ketu axis, because he does get into it in such a sense of talking about the Ida and the Pingala, which are two nadis in the body. They're in opposition to each other. They also kind of form almost this double helix that rides up the spine. And, not to get totally off in different tangents, but some have said that we're part of a binary star system, maybe even a trinary star system, and that the motion is actually that of a double helix as well. As above, so below on every level. So when you're talking about Rahu, for instance, what are we talking about?
Well, Rahu is like a malefic energy. Wherever Rahu sits or whoever Rahu sits with, he wants to absorb and obtain and control everything around him. So Rahu, is known to be a bit of a troublemaker. That's when I see Rahu sitting in a certain house, I know that he's going to take over certain things, and that way I can tell somebody, okay, this is what you want to watch out for. This is where you don't want to cross the line, or this is what you want to watch in the future. So yeah, Rahu's a little troublemaker, but he can be put in good spots, that might seem bad, but like if he goes in the 6th house, the house of deaths and diseases, Rahu actually wants to overtake all of those diseases. He wants to overcome them, overtake them. People who have Rahu in the 6th house actually become quite good healers because they want to know and understand everything there is to know about diseases.
Yeah, so Rahu amplifies. So if you had, Rahu at Mars, for instance, in, say, your house of gains.
Well, then you would definitely have a lot of gains, but you might not be a very nice person gaining it.
Oh, so you could end up being kind of like an Ebenezer Scrooge before the end of the
or
night.
a BG or something like that, yeah.
BG, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It's very aggressive. But, it's not all bad. So if you know these things and you know not to cross those lines, then you're put in a spot to say, well, hey, okay, these are my potentials, and I'm just, going to do my best with them. But at least now you know.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting the way that houses are laid out, too. So Rahu can give you a lot of indication about your tendencies in this life, in a sense.
And what you're supposed to be doing in this life, too.
Yeah, and what you're supposed to be doing. So this, again, when we look at this and say, well, why does astrology work, or how does it work? Well, it's kind of the matrix. It's a blueprint of the matrix that we're in. So you have the soul knowing that it wants to work on certain issues. It might have some lessons that it didn't quite finish with yet. And then it might have some things that it is finished with. And Ketu can tell you kind of what you're finished with in so many senses, right?
Ketu tells you where you've been, what you've already mastered. Yep, in your past life.
So, like, just to give you, for instance, if Ketu is sitting in the 12th house, then, what can we deduce if Ketu is in the 12th house? And if it's, just say it was by itself in the 12th house and, there wasn't any other planets there with it.
Ketu in the 12th house. Well, your 12th house is also a house of spirituality, and Ketu is about spirituality as well. So whenever I see that Ketu sitting in the 12th house, that means you're basically done with this lifetime. You get to level up. You are done. You don't have to come back if you don't want to. You've done it all. You've traveled all the way around.
And as we're saying, the soul, that eternal part of us it's got things it needs to work on when we come back. So, this is the blueprint. This is why Vedic astrology is so powerful, because it tells you when you jumped into the matrix. This is when you came into the matrix to give you your best opportunity at achieving the things that you wanted to achieve. And so if you look at the way your chart is laid out, that gives you, I mean, you can't ask for a better clue about why am I here?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Most people want to know, why am I here? What am I good at? What are some things I need to watch out for? But mainly, I would say just, what am I good at? Where should I be applying my potential?
Interesting. And so if you did have Ketu in the 12th house, then you would have Rahu opposite it.
Mm-hmm.
Which now, what would that denote too in conjunction? Uh, yeah, that's why we're talking about this axis, because it
Mm-hmm.
kind of gives you an indication about, in some ways, past and future,
Mm-hmm.
who you were, who you are,
Mm-hmm.
and what you came here to do.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff you can gather from it. It does take a little bit of time to look into these things, because there's so many different possibilities. But yeah.
Yeah, so as we were saying, they're always 6 apart. So the 6th house, and having say Rahu in the 6th house again, it depends on what planets you're with.
Mm-hmm.
If it was just sitting there by itself, what would we be kind of looking at?
That would be someone who, because the sixth house is also about underprivileged, serving the underprivileged, um, and your enemies. And so Rahu would have a very strong desire to serve underprivileged people. Rahu would have a strong desire to overcome diseases and debts. So Rahu is actually, that's a really good placement if you have Rahu sitting in your sixth house.
I would say that would be an awesome location when you conjunct that with the 12th house and Ketu,
Mm-hmm.
to have a life that's going to give you an opportunity for what's called moksha, liberation, from this karmic cycle. So when we see people that have that, they have Ketu in the 12th and Rahu in the 6th, you kind of get the impression that if all goes as planned, you might not be coming back,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
unless you chose to come back, because then that's what we have with the ascended masters, beings that have decided, they've done all they've had to do, but they look down, and because of empathy and because of love and compassion, they come in and brave the world again. They come in and brave this draconian system that we are in order to help others achieve liberation, moksha, enlightenment, and ascension.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's very, very interesting. So, hopefully that'll give you guys a little bit of insight into Rahu and Ketu and why that axis is so important. Because, like what we were saying right there, that would be somebody that just looking at that, not taking into account anything else, like Jupiter is is a great
Beneficial.
benefactor,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, again, if you had Jupiter in conjunct, say in the 12th, with Ketu, that's
Then you have yourself a real spiritual guru.
yeah. Then you have maybe another Buddha walking the planet,
Mm-hmm.
something along those lines. But now it could be that you might find out that your Rahu is in the 2nd house, for instance, and that would be different.
Mm-hmm. That would be different. The second house is family lineage, gains of all kinds, and that's where someone would have to watch themselves because they want to make a lot of money, and they'll do almost anything they need to do to get it. Because Rahu's a little bit of a cheater wherever he sits.
Right. So then again, now if we had Mars conjunct with that, then you would definitely want to recognize perhaps there's a lot of competitiveness. Perhaps they would maybe even go a little bit too far. BG.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me there. Sorry. Must have been a little bit of dust.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that gives you some insight into that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a fascinating access. It really gives you tremendous clues into this life and where you've been before,
Mm-hmm.
because it's also showing you don't have to do that. Like sometimes we'll get people that will have K2 in relationship, in the house of relationships, and every time it seems relationships have been what has eluded them,
Mm-hmm.
long-lasting relationships. But there again, because of when they decided to jump in to the matrix, they knew at that time that even though it might be something once they get into the matrix that they're going to really desire, because have a strong desire for like a partner, a life partner, or something along those lines, that the work they were going to do in this life was going to be maybe a little more solitary and had to be focused on different priorities.
Mm-hmm. Right. It does make for a difficult dating life when you have Ketu sitting in your 7th house of relationships. But it does show that somebody has already done that, and they can run a business on their own.
Yeah. And so, again, Ketu is going to be in the 7th. So then if you have Rahu in the 1st.
Rahu in the 1st house, you would have somebody who's very kind of into themselves, very probably a really strong athlete of some kind, but somebody who is very self-absorbed.
And again, self-absorbency to the extreme can lead to problem in relationships. So you see how these things go together. It just kind of makes sense, and it does give us an inclination then too. That could be the lonesome leader type. It could be the person that, in some senses takes one for the team by just focusing on their life's work to the exclusion of relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did have a client just the other day. It was really, really beautiful because she was wondering about what is my life path? What am I supposed to be doing? And her guides were really telling me to just double tell her that she is supposed to help people who have extra challenges, people who, I guess I could say the word underprivileged. And that's what she really loved to do anyhow, but she was at a crossroads and she wasn't quite sure which way do I go from here. And her guides were like, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to follow these and help these people.
Yeah. And so, I should also point out that, self-absorption can be looked as like narcissism in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have to be, because when we have like a single-minded purpose, like, there's, you have this feeling that there's something that you have to achieve. It could be anything. It could be the cure for something really malignant, for instance. It could be, free energy, like a Tesla type of person. Could be anything, and just having that sense of purpose where, you're all about your work because you know how important it is. So, there's that way of looking at it as well. So I hope you guys found this interesting. I think it's a fascinating access.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives us so much insight.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So as always, guys, thanks for your support on Ko-Fi and Patreon. Thanks for being part of the family. Make sure you are subscribed to both channels. Anybody that needs to reach out and set up a time for an appointment, it's evolutionaryenergyarts at Gmail or EEARTS at protonmail.com. Vedic charts, typically it takes Cindy about 2 to 3 hours to put one together, and then we usually go over one in about 40 minutes to an hour, and we do a biofield tuning session at that time along with energy work. And we're scheduling outwards about 3 weeks. You need to know the place as well as the exact time and the day, in order to get accurate information. If it's one of those things where I don't remember if it was 6 a.m. or 6 p.m.
Don't do that, because that leaves me with hundreds of possibilities, and you with hundreds of possibilities. That's just not an option if you don't have the time. You'd have to do something different. Like, I've had people have success calling vital statistics to get their time.
Yeah, and should be on your birth certificate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important. It's extremely important, because it can be off. Even 20 minutes can change some conjunctions in planets.
And then I just wanted to talk about a moment, the way I do read charts. What I'm developing is kind of my own way that I do it. It's a form of soul realignment, and that's why we do the energy work and the biofield tuning, because it puts you more in coherence with your higher self.
Yeah, and we've had amazing success with that, and people that have, just they've had complete turnarounds.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them have, and shared, and even we've had people that say, I still don't understand it all, but all I know is that, wow, what a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we just need your patience right now.
Yes.
If you did want one.
As always, guys, much love. God bless and namaste.
Namaste.